back to the Torque Test channel. It seems lately there are a lot more high-speed ratchets on the market than years past, so let's take a look at what could be the best. We've been guilty, admittedly, so far of missing some pricey tool truck options, but something they can't touch, it seems, is the crazy high RPM of some of these options out today. I mean, we're calling 250 RPM high speed here. Try 450 RPM from this M12, or even 10 more RPM at 460 from their sister brand under the same TTI arm, Ryobi, with their new high-speed introduction. Or let's get even crazier, 800 RPM from Makita ratchets. Spoiler alert, as is often the case with cordless ratchets on the channel, none of these match their specs, some much higher, others lower. But does that matter when the rubber meets the road and we're not simply turning air like how these ratchets are rated? Let's find out. Oh, and basically one snaps in half too, so that's cool. This is Ryobi's all-new brushless HP high-speed 3/8 ratchet, PSBRC26B, and it's better than the M12 high-speed ratchet. That's not me saying that, I just opened the dang thing, but Ryobi says so, as it's 460 RPM, beating the 450 of the Milwaukee, and it's rated for 40 foot-pounds of torque, 5 up on its red sibling as well. All for $129, which is a lot less than the $199 Milwaukee is asking for. So, closed case, right? We can all just read the specs and go home, but then we'd be out of a job here, so it's safe to assume there's more to this story. And you'd hope this thing is packing a whole lot of story, as with Ryobi tools, it's got some junk in the trunk with this sort of battery design, but it does have a few party tricks. Yes, a rotatable head, which makes the battery bulge a little more forgivable. Is this like a patented design or something? Because every ratchet should have this, it just makes sense. Next to the M12 high speed, you'll notice that the head size is similar. That's because they measure exactly the same. One annoying aspect of the Ryobi is that it sort of ramps up to speed, which has felt like hesitation compared to that Milwaukee here. But if you feel 450 to 460 RPM is high speed, let me introduce you to the Makitas. Yes, both the 12-volt CXT and 18-volt LXT models, thanks to our friend Joe the Tool Guy, who kindly already made us some dynograph curves here. Oh, and these nuts. I guess if you go fishing around in packages with other guys' tools in them enough times, you shouldn't be surprised to find these. Anyways, what's special about these two boys is that they advertise 800 RPM, 800. Well, let's dispel that right now. Let's measure the free speed of these things, which according to more than one brand's video I've seen testing these tools is just them spinning in air. The CXT 12 volt measures 600, 617, 615 RPM. The LXT 18 volt comes in at 673, 688, yeah, 688 RPM. So A, not the same as each other as advertised, and B, not 800 as advertised, at least from these examples. In defense of Makita, these are pretty sweet. They are both 1/4 inch and 3/8 ratchets, all in one. This design is sort of genius. The ratchet is actually a spinning collar, and these anvils pop in and out, which makes their $140 to $180 price point not bad, considering you'd normally need to buy 2 cordless ratchets to accomplish this. So effectively like maybe an $80 3/8 ratchet. Really cool, and another idea I wish more brands could do, as it doesn't come as a huge size penalty in the head, I think. This ratchet advertises the same 35 foot-pounds as the Milwaukee, so let's see it up against that Milwaukee, but which one to take it on first? Let's see the CXT 12 volt versus the LXT 18 volt model first. 18 volt is on bottom, 12 volt is on top. This is our ratchet gauntlet that uses nylon lock nuts to act as some sort of resistance for these tools to spin up against, then torque nuts at various levels with new hardware for each tool. So as you can see, clearly the bottom tool, which is the LXT 18 volt, takes an early lead and holds on to that despite being rated for the same RPM, same torque, and using an equivalent compact type battery. This results in the 18 volt Makita finishing ultimately at 141 seconds, while the 12 volt tool is still working on its 4th to last bolt. We learned long ago that the specs of power ratchets are pretty useless to compare, but usually that's between brands. Here we're seeing that within a brand, so that's new. Given the high RPM of this Makita though, let's see how it does versus the M12 high speed rated for the same torque, but a full 350 RPM less. Here's the Makita on bottom with the Milwaukee on top now. One thing we like about this test is tools with lower torque stumble when they meet one of these torque nuts, which then require arm intervention to move, and this hurts their time just like it would slow you down in real life, and it does so to slow this M12 down here more often than the Makita, which is a surprise to us. We thought the Makita with its RPM rating would be considerably more weak sauce, but ultimately it doesn't really tip the scales in a meaningful enough way, and the M12 runs away with things, finishing the test in 100 seconds flat, to the Makita's still quite decent, but not quite 100 seconds, 141. And that's partly due to, we think, that the Milwaukee is also flubbing the numbers in RPM, but in another direction. Measuring the same way, the 450 RPM Milwaukee registers an RPM of 604, 655 RPM, which is above the 12 volt Makita rated for 800. These sort of tools are just all over the place. And not to be outdone, not by a long shot, the new Ryobi High Speed rated for 460 follows a similar in-house trend of underselling the spec compared to other brands and sees 727, 716, yeah, about 715 RPM, the highest we've measured from any ratchet before. So based on this alone, if you're free spinning like new, loose, pristine hardware off studs all day, this tool is for you. Nothing else to see here. But let's see it up against some actual tasks to perform. Now, the Ryobi is a weird one. Its ramping up in speed each time you pull the trigger certainly doesn't help it in a time test, and oddly, it's not peak torque limited like a weakling ratchet. It breezes past quite a few torque nuts that the M12 couldn't do with one trigger pull, but at speed, like with some resistance, it slows down more than you would expect. For instance, in this middle sector, despite being much higher RPM and free speed, it's doing this at 200 RPM to the M12's 300 RPM. And even once the M12 is hitting larger threads towards the end of the test here, it's only dropping down to about 225 RPM. The Ryobi is still, once it's able to reach this end, going the same 200 RPM as it did in the beginning and middle portions of this gauntlet. Like once it meets some resistance, just steps down a gear and drives anything home at 200 RPM. This results in a 128 second finish, which is behind the Milwaukee, but we have one last stop for all these tools where they can redeem themselves and put up some extra points, because as for peak torque, the M12 is not winning any awards. It makes about 29 foot-pounds as measured, calibrated with a torque wrench. That doesn't help it score much. The 12 volt Makita, which we saw as not quite impressive as you'd expect looking at its specs, maintains that self-identity here and makes 25 foot-pounds, not great, but also what we were expecting for either Makita based on reviews of this tool and its high RPM stats. As a hand tool, it does climb up to the usual range of torque we test these to without issue though. It's pretty strong. The 18 volt Makita is able to improve on that up to 33 foot-pounds. Adding a few nudges wasn't able to improve on that in any test, and also by hand can be used in ratchet form with some confidence. These tools seem pretty robust. And the Ryobi is again a very capable but odd ratchet and behaves like no other cordless one we've used. It A, makes much more sauce than we expected, and B, further trigger presses sort of stutter it forward. Almost like a reactionless impact ratchet, but weaker and clearly no hammer mechanism in this thing. But damn if it's not effective. This thing can really take off some stuff. 51 foot-pounds on this 40 foot-pound rated tool, that's very nice. When used by hand, more surprises again in store for this tool. Something went click inside of this tool around 150 foot-pounds. Then yes, anything beyond that resulted in the entire ratchet assembly fracturing in half. Ouch. We've had a Hercules sort of click before, then work okay after that, and a Craftsman V20 break at 120 foot-pounds. So this is the third case of breaking a tool here. Puts a bit of a damper on an otherwise very impressive tool, I think, but realistically, these aren't rated for 150 foot-pounds, and you likely won't use it up to that, I feel. So let's see how these tools do score on things that you do use them for. Starting below the M12 high speed for now, on this ranking where you don't want points, so lowest finishes first, as a function of their weight as tested, they are penalized with 32, 38, and 36 points. For their head size cross-sectional sort of area, they score better with smaller heads that fit into more places. That's 34 and 34 for the Makitas and 19 for the smaller new Ryobi. Then for their prices at time of testing, 12 volt has been consistently lately more money, which is funny and odd, 32, 30, and 26 points. The 12 volt took 179 seconds to finish the gauntlet, 141 for the LXT, and 128 for the Ryobi, which is quite good. When it comes to torque, the Ryobi also shaves quite a few more points off by making more of that, 25, 33, and 51 off, helping the Ryobi here. That totals 252, 210, and 158, putting the CXT towards the bottom around here, which makes sense to me. The 18 volt Makita here, which is not bad, better than I expected really. It's not a modern brushless introduction after all. Oddly, this tool sort of killed one of our Makita's batteries in testing. This pack is KO now. That was kind of weird. And finally, losing out to the DeWalt 12 volt by just 1 point for third place, we have the new Ryobi HP. Really, both of Ryobi's HP ratchets, the extended one and this new high speed, are very good. This nudging action for more torque, not something they advertise, maybe a happy accident. It makes it pretty powerful, really. And it spins basically any non-stuck fastener at 200 RPM, no matter what. By our metrics, the M12 is still hard to beat and hasn't been beaten by anything overall yet, but we do run into situations where it having more torque would have been preferred. So this Ryobi sort of does fill in that space nicely, assuming ours still worked, so we need to get another one of these. Okay, so don't loosen 3.5 ton lug nuts with it, not really a deal breaker. Appreciate you joining us for this one. Suggest more ratchets you want to see tested below. Click subscribe to see those, and thanks for watching.